Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are located. And we are so excited to be here into this Microsoft Cloud Weeks. Um, well, it's Security Cloud Weeks because multiple sessions are being delivered in different time zones for hundreds of attendees, especially into the Security Microsoft Certification track. This time we have the Security Operations Analyst. We have 5 days for these sessions. And let me start explaining a little bit about the logistics for this one. So during this cloud week, the live sessions will cover the full curriculum of tracks. Um, this time, the content is no longer distributed using digital Microsoft official courses. Um, Instead, you can access to Microsoft Learn and by going to aka.ms/learn, and you can search for the session that you are taking, SC200, for example, for the Microsoft Security Operations Analyst. This course also is including access for the lab environment. Um, so most of the tracks will include the labs done during the sessions, and you will have some exercises as homework, not just the lab exercises that you will have as homework. There will be some lectures, some topics from the modules that you are going to take as homework. Uh, at some point, I will present the topics that you have for homework, basically, because we are limited in time. Everyday session from Monday to Friday, we're taking it from, well, it has a duration of 5 hours in total. And that session of 5 hours is divided into 2 hours of the presentation, the one that I'm making right now. We have, after that, a 30-minute break. And then after, we have 2 hours and a half for an offline Q&A session within the same On24 platform, but with a different link. And also we have we will use that time for you to also work with the lab exercises. At some point, I will also explain how you can access to your labs. But if you're taking a look at the Microsoft Cloud Wix platform that you used to join to this session, you will find out some access within the resources tab where you can find out the lab access. But I would just provide a quick demonstration about how to work with this one. Now, during the presentation, the first 2 hours, I have a colleague of mine in the session that is taking the questions and answers. You can participate at any time by posting your questions. And Gerardo is taking all of your questions and is answering properly to your questions on. Sometimes we need to make some research for looking at something or providing you an official link for where there is a Microsoft document or article, for example, that you can use it as reference to, and that will be complementary to answer to your question, basically. And during the Q&A session and lab session, the last 2 hours and a half, that would be a session with no presentation. No presentation will be made unless that I consider useful for explaining something or to answering to a questions. During that time, I will be available also to answer into some questions if you have some of them. These live sessions are being recorded. However, you can use the attend track button to access recorded sessions on demand. You must register for sessions in order to view them on demand, but the on demand will be available 5 to 10 days after the cloud week concludes. Okay, so it's not immediately available, but eventually you will see it in case that you are losing some time from the days, or if you wanted to take it again. Okay, well, you can access to the platform and locate the resources tab to check onto the download resources option for uh, taking a look at some other complementary content like your lab access, some other documentation, and useful links. As a friendly reminder, there is certification renewals on it. Now, this session is associated to the official, let's say, content of the Microsoft Security Operations Analyst, and there is a Microsoft official certification exam for that. It's an associate level exam. It is just one exam, but to say the truth, it is a difficult one comparing to the other associate exams from the security track, like information uh, protection administrator, the SC 400, identity and access administrator, the SC 300, Azure security engineer, the ASA 500. All those are associate level courses. The SC 200, it's not like I consider, based on my experience, the most difficult comparing to the other associate level for the security track. So once that you are certified, let's say when you're taking the exam and scoring at least your 700 points on, um, Microsoft mm, is associating an expiration because, well, especially on cloud services, um, like courses associated to the Azure platform, the Microsoft 365, and so on. Those platforms actually are receiving frequent updates into existing services with new features or new updates or totally new services eventually sometimes every month, sometimes every couple of months. And that makes that there is a need for an update of the content of the courses on it. So if we're taking, and that's why Microsoft set an expiration for those certifications instead of the previous model that were like the on-premise certification, like the client operating system, that you have that active certification as current for as long as the product is still receiving support. Like for example, when you took the Windows 7 or something like that, you can have that certification as current as an active uh, during all of the time that that product is still available and receiving support, basically. And eventually you can just take like the new version when the Windows 10 was released or Windows 11 or something like that for exams on. But well, now we're talking about cloud services that are frequently receiving updates on. So you don't need to take the exam as your first time for the renewal process. Instead, 3 months before your expiration, your first year, you will you will start receiving automated emails as a friendly reminder that you have a soon to expire certification, 3 months, and you eventually are receiving more emails in case that you didn't pay attention to the first ones on. The email is including a link for taking an assessment. The assessment is not the same as the exam because it will be less questions and you don't need to take it into your online proctor mode or into a testing center. And you don't need to, it is not going to take like an hour and a half or 2 hours. So it's going to be a short assessment, especially associated with the updates recently added from the last year that you took the exam, for example. So you will experience between 20 to 25 questions, and there is a minimum score that you need to that you Yeah, minimum number you need to score basically in order to pass it and renew the certification. If you don't score it the first time, you can take it multiple times. The only thing that you should pay attention is that your certification did not expire, basically. Because if it expired, you will need to take the full exam again. So be careful with that. Also, well, there will be a lab support and Q&A session. There is another button in the system that you can click to join to the Q&A after the 30 minutes of break, after the first 2 hours. 30-minute break after that, and then you can join to the session for lab support and a Q&A in case that you have any question or comment or something associated to the lab or to the content. Now, let me also start with an introduction about this course and introduction about myself also, the presenter basically. Microsoft Security Operations Analyst, and the code of the course is the SC200. My name is Eduardo Lopez. I'm an MCT. Uh, I am from Mexico. I'm actually located in Mexico right now, and I have a little bit more than 4 years as an MCT, as a Microsoft certified trainer. I hold some certifications, usually from the sessions that I deliver uh, frequently, on every week base, for example, especially into the Microsoft security track like this one and the infrastructure track. 4 years ago, I just started with the fundamentals and the infrastructure certification courses, the Azure administrator, eventually the security engineer, network administrator, the Azure Solutions Architect. The old versions of I still have those certifications as current because I have been renewing those. And last year, I just started with the recent or the new Microsoft Security Certification track that involves a fundamentals level, like the security, compliance, and identity fundamentals, and like a 3 or 4 different associate levels. And they recently added to the catalog SC100, which is the cybersecurity architect, considered the expert level, a level up to the associate level, for example. And also recently just become multi-cloud instructor because I'm also um, AWS authorized instructor. So I just deliver also sessions into other cloud environments. And well, then in the future, planning to also go to another platform. That I already have one certification, but it's not enough because I need to just uh, pass through a process to receive authorization to become officially a trainer into other platforms. Or I'm trying to just uh, continue to learn and to improve my knowledge and my delivery. So I hope that you enjoy this session. About this course, the objective is that we are going to learn how to investigate, response to, and hunt for threats using Microsoft Sentinel, mm, which is representing a security information and event management tool, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and Microsoft 365 Defender. So, in this course, you will learn how to mitigate cyber threats using these technologies and tools. And specifically, you will configure and use Microsoft Sentinel as well as the utilize KQL or custom query language to perform some detection, analysis, and reporting. The learners should have different or prerequisites as knowledge of this course. It is recommended because this class or this course is making the assumption that you come from fundamentals level, for example, that you already know multiple concepts like the different cloud service models and so on, the security principles, zero trust, for example, multi-factor authentication, and so on, because this course will not include as demonstration of explanations of all those concepts that come from a previous or from a lower level, like the fundamentals, for example. So learners should have some prerequisites like the basic understanding of Microsoft 365, fundamental understanding of Microsoft security, compliance, and identity products also, intermediate understanding of Windows operating system like Windows 10 or Windows 11, familiarity with Azure services, specifically Azure SQL databases and Azure Storage, familiarity with Azure virtual machines and virtual networking also, and basic understanding of scripting concepts. And the course will help the learners to prepare for the official exam, SC200 or Microsoft Security Operations Analyst exam. This course agenda is divided into 8 modules. So we have 4 days of content or lectures, let's say, and the final day, the next Friday or the number 5, we have an exam prep, which will be a session with a little bit different than this one that we are going to take, the final one. So if we have 8 modules, basically that means that we have an average of 2 modules to cover per day to finishing up with 100% of the content, and then to leave the exam prep session at the end, the next Friday, for example. So the modules are, we're going to follow the same order as the number. Not module 1 is for mitigating threats using Microsoft 365 Defender. Module 2 is mitigate threats using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Module number 3, mitigate threats using Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Module 4, creating queries for Microsoft Sentinel using custom query language. Module 5 is to configure our Microsoft Sentinel environment. Module 6, connect logs to Microsoft Sentinel. Number 7, create detections and perform investigations using Microsoft Sentinel. And number 8, final, perform threat hunting in Microsoft Sentinel. Looking at certification areas, when you are enrolling for taking the exam, the official exam, to see if you can score the 700 points at least and receive your certification, the exam is divided in 3 main study areas. The first one is mitigating threats using Microsoft 365 Defender, and it's the way that we can see associated is between 25 to 30%. The percentage was it's indicating the relative weight of each area on the exam. The higher the percentage, the more questions that we are likely to see in that area. Okay, so 25 to 30% of the questions on the exam will come from the study area number 1, which is the mitigate threats using Microsoft 365 Defender. Study area number 2, mitigate threats using Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and the weight is another 25 to 30%. And number 3, or study area number 3, mitigate threats using Microsoft Sentinel. The weight is 40 to 45%. So this is the one that has more weight comparing to the other study areas. But each study area will include 1 or more modules, for example, from the previous list. 8 modules for 3 study areas. So that means that it could be a couple of study areas can include, for example, 3 modules for a study area, and that makes 6 for the first 2 study areas, for example. And let's say that the last one, it is including a 2 module, so that makes the 8 modules, for example, for that. And maybe that's why some study areas that are usually including more modules than others usually is the one that has the more weight associated. So now, like like I was explaining from the beginning, we are limited on the time because we only basically have 2 hours of the lectures and the presentation. And after that, then there's 2 hours and a half for you to do your homework and practice with the labs. However, and because of that, because we are limited on time, I will not cover the 100% of the module content like on a regular session because time is not enough. However, I will partially cover some content that it was already predefined, and it is this content that I'm presenting right now. You can see that in this Excel spreadsheet, uh, we can see a section for a lecture and lab. The yellow ones are the one that correspond to the module one, and the green ones for the module number two. So I will be limited to only cover these topics from module one. Well, the module one is mitigate threats using Microsoft 365 Defender, and the lesson or lab name is Introduction to Threat Protection with Microsoft 365, and mitigate incidents using Microsoft 365 Defender, and a lab session, which is Explore Microsoft 365 Defender. And then from my same session, I will eventually switch to a module number two and covering these five topics on it. Protect against threat with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, deploy the Microsoft Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint environment, configure manage automation using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, perform device investigations, and finally configure for alerts and detections. And these are going to be the topics that you are taking as your homework or that you can work with at the time that we are at the Q&A and lab session, basically at the last 2 hours and a half. Okay. So I will take a screenshot of this image and I will present this during the Q&A session, for example, on it. So you can save it for yourself. And now you can see on which topics you just need to cover for your homework today and before starting tomorrow's session, for example. So I will cover that partially because of the 2 hour limit that we have, basically. Okay. With that being said, we can start with the module number one, guys. So just give me a second and I can start presenting the module one, which is for mitigate threats using Microsoft 365 Defender. So let's take a look at introduction to threat protection with Microsoft 365. Now, another important thing on it. Sometimes I will switch over the presentation to my portal because I do have an account already that has privilege to access to the security or the 365 Defender portal. And I already authenticated to the Azure platform, basically, on it, because sometimes I will need to use one tool or the other because the course is not limited to only 365 Defender because, well, of its interaction and relationship um, with other services. Basically, we are going to see that this course some of the instructions or demonstrations can be associated with the Microsoft Sentinel service, while the others with the Microsoft 365 service, basically. Okay, so well, returning to the presentation, we're introduction to threat protection with Microsoft 365. And this lesson is including a couple of topics. First, understand Microsoft 365 Defender solution by domain and understanding Microsoft 365 Defender role in a modern security operations center or an SOC. What is the Microsoft 365 Defender? 365 Defender is a suite of security product services that when the clients are already subscribed to the service, you will have access to a suite of a family of security services, for example. The convenience of this 365 Defender as a service is that there is no need for the client or the end user who subscribe for it to manage the underlying infrastructure like the compute, like the networking, like the storage. The service is built in to the portals. And which portal, for example, you can access from the portal of the security.microsoft.com. And if you are able to sign in securely, then you can access to the user interface of the Microsoft 365 Defender. Also, I can show you in a couple of minutes and how that platform look like if this is the case that this is your first time, for example, taking a training from this with no previous knowledge of those concepts that I'm talking about. So The 365 Defender is a suite of products that we are going to see. There is, for example, Defender for Office 365, that suite of services that can help us to protect what happens with the email services, especially the Microsoft online services, basically. Another something that we should consider as a subproduct of 365 Defender is Defender for Endpoint, to try to mitigate some risk of vulnerabilities into the endpoints that we are using to access or consume services, for example. In the Defender for Office 365, we can see that we will find out protection and built-in rules already for detection and remediation of phishing email, open attachments, click a URL, and so on. And we have an option to browse to a website that is very intuitive. There is also the Defender for IoT for Internet of Things, also not so popular on it, but still available. Azure Identity Protection is part of the 365 Defender, a couple of policies that can help us to analyze and investigate a risk to users and a risk for a signing event from users. Also, we can find out that there's as a family of the Defender products, the Defender for Cloud Apps, that can help us to detect the shadow IT. Basically, the applications that the users from an organization are consuming without the knowledge of the same organization, basically. And that can suppose a layer of attack on it, for example. So we should be careful with that. Now, we can see that this Microsoft 365 service is divided by a line that makes a separation using Microsoft Sentinel between external threats and the insider risk. An external threat, of course, that is the scope is bigger geographically speaking, because, well, an insider can be any person from the same organization. So that is going to be uh, really quick to figure it out or guess, basically. So for the insider risk, there is a service called Insider Risk Management into the Microsoft 365 Defender tool that can help us to detect and mitigate some potential risk that the person's internal person from the organization is starting to leak in information that we can consider as important, um, for example. So this is what the Microsoft 365 and its components, basically, but it's a suite or a family of services, basically the Microsoft 365. As part of one of the products from the family of the Microsoft 365 Defender, there is the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint that can help us to detect a malicious payload, for example. Now, there is a concept called the zero trust. Zero trust means or describe that we should never assume to trust on nothing independently on the condition. However, but we should continuously validate to trust on any entity. The entities can be representing objects that represent users or a person, for example, and so on. So, well, Defender for Endpoint, there is a process that we need to just, let's say, onboard the devices that we would like under the control of Defender for Endpoint. And then once that we are there with the enroll or the onboarded devices, for example, then eventually we can see the endpoints that we have been onboarding. It could be a virtual machine, it could be a physical device, and so on. This option is more associated to adapt to the tendency, for example, of bringing your own device or BYOD. I'm sorry about this. To erase this stuff. And okay, well, what will happen when we just onboard for Microsoft Endpoint? Actually, in a script that installs an agent is going to be installed into your computer. And that agent is the one that is going to start reporting some information, some logs and analytics to the main repository that service is using. For example, like the security information and event management through its log analytic workspace base. So, and around the device, there's multiple entities that we should protect, but we are talking specifically for Defender for Endpoint. So, a device is something critical that we just must protect on it because it doesn't work the case to protect an identity, to protect at the level of the Azure AD, to tell instructions on how uh, to and how to become or how to enforce security to entities if at the end we are not protecting one of the pillars or one of the layers that is the endpoint on. If an endpoint is compromised at its operating system, it doesn't matter if we have the best security control for the users, for the applications, for the networks, for other Azure virtual machines, for example. Um, if you have a big security breach into your endpoints on it. So it will help us to detect the actual condition of the devices that we are eventually onboarding. Uh, and make sure that those endpoints are protected and it is safe to access to the service or to request access to a service from one of the endpoints like this, for example. Now we're looking at an overall Microsoft 365 Defender in a modern security operations center for security operations with a based on a Microsoft reference architecture, and we can identify different sections on it. For example, we can see that um, a classic SIEM that stands for Security Incident and Event Management, because historically, security operations have been focused on collecting as much activity and event data from the environment as they could in a security incident event management system. While collection is an important foundational step, so this is often led to a collection is not detection problems where few actionable insights were gleaned from the data collected. So the queries um, in a classic SIM are altered by human and the analyst will help derive detections of malicious attack, but these queries often generate many false positive alerts because of the static nature of the queries and the dynamic nature of attacks. And these false positives uh, can lead to a waste of precious analyst time and attention and take them away from managing real incidents and attacks also. We can identify also a Microsoft Threat Intelligence option and a deep insights on it, which is representing a huge leap forward for security operations effectiveness and efficiency comes from the introduction of the extended detection and response or the XDR tool. And it's a trend that started with the endpoint detection and response with the EDR tools like Defender for Endpoint, or formerly known as the ATP, Advanced Threat Protection. So this extended detection and response tool will provide visibility into specific assets types and provide enhanced detection response and recovery capabilities. XDR tools or extended detection tools like Microsoft 365 Defender or Microsoft uh, for Defender for Cloud that will provide this an efficiency by focusing on individual asset types, like the endpoint operating systems, identity systems, cloud productivity applications, storage services, databases, for example. We can find out that there is also an extended detection and response, threat intelligence. We can identify that there is a security orchestration and automation and remediation, or SOAR. Another key element for empowering security operations comes from the adoption of the security orchestration and automation and remediation technology and in integration of tool sets together to natively or by providing some APIs. So the SOAR, Security Orchestration and Automation Response, or slash automation, will help us to reduce the manual work for the analysis and other roles with seamless experiences, because manual steps take time away from meaningful work and erode some analysts morally, and they could rather be fighting the bad guys rather than copying and pasting between tools and switching consoles and so on. It can help us to speed up because the time and because the automation happens at a machine speed rather than human death. And for use it for increase it for scale, the security operations to meet the growing volume of attacks and increase the scope or the complexity of more modern multi-cloud hybrid enterprise. And Microsoft is focusing on an automation and an integration by embedding the security operations and automated response technology throughout different tools with Azure Logic App, Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft 365 Defender, and the single Microsoft 365 Defender console. Uh, it's a console that we can use to integrate experiences for endpoint, email, software as a service services, and so on. Then there is the Microsoft Sentinel and the SIEM modernization, because Microsoft Sentinel is a cloud native SIEM that complements the extended detection response tooling by providing a better visibility across the XDR tools and arbitrary log and data sources from any platform, any cloud, any application or device. We can also find out that there is that we can ask all the time for expert assistance here with this green color on the close to the upper right corner on it, because none of us is going to be as smart as all of us. So succeeding against the connected ecosystem of attacks will require defenders to work together as a community that will share intelligence, insights, and expertise on it. So and Microsoft helps the customers to get expert assistance with. So by looking at the Microsoft Threat Expert, it's they are going to manage hunting services built into Microsoft 365 Defender that will provide the Security Operations Center with an expert level monitoring and analysis to help them to ensure critical threats in the environment that get missed, for example. So these are some of the concepts and the most critical ones associated with this topic on this lesson for M365 Defender and in a modern security operations center. A security operations team will often focus on three key outcomes on it. First, the incident management, to manage active attacks on the environment, including, for example, to reactively responding to detected attacks, proactively hunting for attacks that are slip through traditional threat detections, and coordinating the communications with the legal and other business implications of the security incidents, for example. Another of the three key outcomes for security operations teams is the incident preparation, to help the organization to prepare for future attacks. Incident preparation is a broader strategy set of activities that are aimed at building muscle memory and context at all levels of the organization. And this strategy prepares the people to better handle the major attacks and gain insights on security process improvements also. Then to deliver these outcomes, security operations teams should be structured to focus on key outcomes in a larger security operation team. So the outcomes are often broken on between subnets. And there is the security operations model with multi-tier model, where we can identify a tier number one or the triage tier. This is the first line of response for security incidents. Triage is focused on the high volume processing on alerts or of alerts, and typically generated by an automation and tools on it. So the triage process will solve for most of common incident types and will resolve them within the team. The tier number two is the investigation one. Investigation stage focus on incidents that require further investigation, often requiring correlation of data points from multiple sources. So, and this investigation tier looks to provide repeatable solution to issues escalated to them. And it then enables the tier one to resolve later recurrence of what of that issue type on it. So the tier two will also respond to alerts against business critical system to reflect the severity of the risk and the need to act quickly on. And there is a tier three that is the hunting tier, for example, where this is focused on primarily on proactive hunting for highly sophisticated attack, process and develop guidance to the wider teams of for maturing security controls as a result, and the tier three team also act as an escalation point for major incidents into support for ethnic analysis and response also. We have a basic guided demonstration and that I will use with my couple of platforms that I have. The name of the demonstration is to how we can detect and respond to modern attacks with the unified security information and event management and with extended detection response. So what I will do is to first take a look at my portal. Now, into this Microsoft Edge with an in private mode, sorry, we can find that the first tab is the one for the user interface. For going to the security.microsoft.com, or we can access to this platform also by going to the admin.microsoft.com. And then if we have admin privilege, we can just take a look at the list of the services and we just find out the Azure AD service, for example. And then we just we will find out the Azure AD portal and multiple other URLs, but we can access to the different list of the admin centers. And into those lists of admin centers, we will find out the security portal. So by clicking on that security portal, we will be redirected to the security.microsoft.com URL. That was the original that I just accessed directly on it by authenticating with a supported account, for example. So from here, how can we just, let's say, hunt for threat or going hunting for threats on? Because, well, remember that Microsoft 365 Defender, it is abstracting a layer of administration from the Microsoft Sentinel, which is a service that I need to create on top of a workspace in order to see the user interface. And then after that, we need to start connecting the data sources to starting to see some content collected from the connectors of the Microsoft Sentinel base. Here, in this case, we can see that this is some sort of a security information and event management service, but we don't have the same control as the other, basically. So when we need to go, let's say, detect and respond to modern attacks with a unified SIEM and XDR capabilities on, you can locate first the incidents and alerts view. From the incidents and alert view, you can see a concentration of incidents or alerts that happen with the logs that your services or devices are consuming. For example, there is no alert so far generated and no incidents. It could be a reason for that because I don't have within this active subscription access to multiple services that eventually can just start generating multiple logs on it. So not within the alerts, not within the incident, because I just recently activated this account, so there is nothing from there. And then, well, when I just find out some of the incidents, I will see all of its associated entities. Like if there is a file associated, if there's an application, if there is something different on it. And then when we just feel you're a little bit more confident, we can just go hunting on it. But it's not just going hunting like a hunting physically or going to catch something on it. In this case, what we're trying to catch, well, something physical. what we're trying to catch is like a security risk into your security holes on. So when you just click the first time with this account to some tool like the advanced hunting, for example, then we can just accept to yes or no, and then we can just open the advanced hunting user interface. And then we can start taking a look at the query editor on it. At the left, in this section, we have the schema with different tables and with table names. But also, uh, you will find out that there is an schema that comes from the amount of data sources that I'm that those data sources, for example, through these data connectors, my platform is ingesting all those logs already. So I don't need to perform some other manual operations for that. I eventually will see that I have some alerts to generate basically. So this schema is dynamic because as soon as I'm connecting a new data source, um, the schema is fully updated, and now you will have no consistency if you took um, if you took on this service and then wanted to take a look after on. So how this KQL works by calling the name of the table and making or running your query basically. But well, I don't have nothing to be stored into this truck yet in the form of the logs that I would like to take a look basically. But well, eventually as we are moving on through the different modules, maybe I will just, as a demonstration, create a data connector, configure that data connection on it, and then come back here and install it uh, into your own subscription, basically. So when I just navigating through the schema, for example, from the advanced hunting for the Microsoft 365, sorry, we can see a list of tables on it, sorted by different categories. If I'm looking at devices, for example, then I can double click on the name of the table, device info or device information. It is automatically writing the name, and I can just click on run a query. But so far, I don't have any no devices onboarded. But well, let's see what we can do there by just clicking here to create a new query on it. That will be we will see the query editor from here, and that we can start writing it or we can start copying and pasting it. But the result will depend that if we already have those resources that we are looking for. Because in my case, if I'm clicking on the option for a device information, then no computers or no virtual machines are connected to that data source, so there is no logs that are interested to somebody basically. Now, for going hunting, but from the Microsoft Sentinel service, I previously create the workspace that I just needed, and then uh, the Sentinel requires a log workspace for the data connection points. So just create the log workspace and then create the Microsoft Sentinel as a service basically on top of that log and workspace. So if I would like to go hunting on it, there is specifically under the threat management to the left vertical menu, a hunting section. When I'm just clicking on the hunting one, now instead of being redirected, especially for the user interface, um, the end user interface on it, that is a little bit different. This guy is just going specifically for the hunting catalog, for example, where there is a multi-stage attacks taking the reference of the MITRE attack framework on it that starts with the reconnaissance stage that moves on to the resource development initial access, execution, persistence, privilege escalation, defensive action, credential access, and discovery, for example. Now, if we would like to go hunting, we have different options. I can create a new KQL query, or I can just take one of the built-in ones to see what happens. And then I just, of course, in order to generate some logs or some information from this, it is because I already have some logs collected with this within this connector. If I'm, for example, double clicking on the query to check to take a look at the checks on the AWS or GCP changes being made for that data source, and I don't have the data source collected. So when I just click in here to changes made to the AWS IAM policy, just wanted to see those. So maybe I just try to run quickly and expect to see an output, but because I don't have an AWS connector, my expectation will be that you don't have no output to display, basically. So it is a good idea to adapt to the available connectors, basically. And well, by going or scrolling a little bit down under configuration, we can just click on the data connectors. And this is how we can start connecting the pieces together. The third-party service with or that includes also Microsoft security services or other Microsoft Azure services on, not just the ones for the third party one. Every connector will have a different series of instructions to create the connection. For example, the most pretty straightforward of testing how can I connect a data source is by using the search bar and then looking for something so specific. For example, like I'm interested into a storage account. I can read the description for this template to finally open the connectors page and try to create it. This connector comes only with one query. And okay, if I'm looking for, there is a connector called the Azure Storage Account, I can see the connector description, comes with one built-in query if I would like to use it. The different data types that the connector will connect to the storage blob service, queue, table, and file, because usually in a storage account, if it is one from a general purpose, will include 4 services at the same time. So I can just click on open the connectors page. And we can see, okay, so yeah, you're in compliance with some prerequisites. You have a workspace already. And now for configuration, you need to connect Azure Storage account to Microsoft Sentinel and so on. And well, after going for the instruction, we can just click on next step to, okay, if you wanted to, you have a recommended workbooks, for example, on it. But well, in this case, between parentheses, there's a number of 0. That means that there's no workbooks associated with this. But with a storage account, there's one query simple that I can use to run. Let me just click on run it. And by clicking on run it, then a KQL query is written automatically with a table name, the storage blob logs. And we can see that the other lines next to the pipe is where we start to filter. And that filter will be using the where operator, for example, where the time period is major than more than 3 days ago, and the status contains a server busy and so on, things like that. And the project to display to display is the time generated, operation name, status code or status text, for example, resource ID, and finally sort by the time generated. And well, the expectation will be that to just generate a couple of logs, but so far I don't have an storage account yet, for example, so I'm not generating nothing at my logs level from this one, so you don't have an option just to test it from here. Now, if you would like to test it, there is a demo environment that you can try. So, for example, you can start looking for the log analytics demo. You will get to this log analytics tutorial. Into this tutorial, you are going to click on the link to log analytics demo environment. You need to sign in with one of your accounts. Let's say I will use my work one. And once that that you're redirected with a couple of times on it, now what you're looking right now is to the user interface of a separate workspace that is actually not mine. So from here, I can, for example, taking a quick look of, I don't know, let's say of an update management. And then we will expect to see a result for this. And the result, sorry, is a series of logs sorted by the most recent one, and then using 157 different records. And that is just an example on how we can use automation in this process of extended detection or automated responses on it. We are using actually automation to simplify a process, or for example to defend ourselves. And then if I know that something will happen, that is something bad, and if I know how to solve it, sometimes I can just import an script and wait for that script to run to perform the operations that I need on. I can set new other rules based on this and so on. So well, okay, there is a switch off lesson. The next lesson is for mitigating incidents using Microsoft 365 Defender. The lessons that we are going to cover during this module, or this lesson number 2, is to manage incidents in Microsoft 365 Defender, investigate incidents in 365 Defender, and conduct advanced hunting in Microsoft 365 Defender. The Microsoft 365 Defender portal, I already showed you by going to with a URL security.microsoft.com and signing in with an account that has permissions to access this portal, because not all of the users will have access, and it's not recommended actually, just for the security team. And well, once that you are able to sign in, you can see that there is multiple entities around the 365 Defender portal. There is a home view. All the time that we just finally successfully are authenticated to the Microsoft 365 Defender portal, we can see a home view, which is the default. We're looking at the home view as a glance view of the overall security held for the organization. But there is also a section for incidents alerts where we can see the broader story of an attack by connecting the dots seen on the individual alerts on the entities, and we will know exactly where an attack started and what devices are impacted and who was affected on it and where the threat has gone. There is also a section for the hunting, where I already showed you that we can proactively search for malware, suspicious files, and activities in our Microsoft 365 organization. There's also an action center. Into the action center, we can use that information to reduce the volume of alerts that our security team must address manually, allowing our security operations team to focus on more sophisticated threats and other high-value initiatives also. There is a section for a security score. Security score is basically a number that we can see usually in a percentage that give us an idea on how secure our resources or our environment in total is. The goal is to improve our security or overall security posture with the Microsoft Secure Score. And this page provides an all-up summary of the different security features and capabilities that we have learned and include recommendation for some areas to improve on. There is another section for the threat analytics. With the threat analytics, we can get the detailed information that we need to better protect our users, devices, and more. We can access to also policies and rules to use set up policies to manage devices, protect against threats, and receive alerts about various activities in your organization. And finally, there is a section for permissions, delegation of permissions and roles at the security portal. And there, well, with permissions and roles, we can manage who in the organization has access to view content and perform tasks in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. And we can also assign Microsoft 365 permissions in the Azure AD portal. When we're managing incidents, Microsoft 365 Defender can help us to automatically aggregate malicious and suspicious events that are found in different devices, users, mailboxes, and different entities in a network. So for the incident management, grouping related alerts into an incident will give a security defenders a comprehensive view of an attack. For instance, security defenders can see where the attack started, what tactics were used, and how far the attack has gone into the network. And they can also see the where the attack started, what tactics were used, and how far the attack has gone into the network. They can also see the scope of the attack, like how many devices, users, and mailboxes were impacted, and how severe the impact was, and other details about affected entities. We can also go for an incident investigation by taking a look at these related entities, like list of alerts, the list of the devices, users, mailboxes, applications, and also evidence. We can access to a investigate alerts section into the M365 Defender. At this point, we can use an attack simulator to generate incidents for demonstration purposes also, but we can just take a look at the alerts and the incident section on it. Now, Defender is associated to other Defender products because usually if an event of an alert, if it is the alert, if it is triggered by another Defender for Cloud or Defender sub-product, the alert will be generated but that service, like the identity protection and so on. Because we're going to see here in this alert, usually into another platform that is completely different than the ones that you know. Or like the Defender for Cloud apps, for example, or the investigate alert from the Defender, you can find out exactly the same alert. That doesn't mean that there is no true risk at the same time, because you are using the same account. Two different user interfaces are reporting the same error or issue, for example. Microsoft 365 Defender can automatically investigate and resolve the individual alerts through automation and using artificial intelligence. So security defenders can also perform more remediation steps to evolve or to resolve the attack straight from the incident view. And incidents from the last 30 days can be shown in an incident queue. And from here, security defenders can see which uh, incidents should be prioritized based on risk level and other factors. Security defenders can also rename incidents, assign them to individual analysts, classify and add tags to incidents for a better and more customized incident management experience also. The Action Center, which is a unified user interface, can help us to bring together remediation actions across the Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365, and it defines a common language for all remediation actions and provides a unified investigation a unified investigation experience on it. So the security operations team has a single pane of glass experience to view and to manage remediation actions on. The Action Center will consist of pending and historical items. The pending will display a list of ongoing investigation that require attention. Recommended actions are presented that your security can approve or reject, and the pending type the pending tab appears only if there are pending operations. While the history tab it will display an audit log for all of the different following items, like remediation actions that were taken as a result of an automated investigation. Also, remediation actions that were approved by our security operations teams, commands that were run, and remediation actions that were applied. We can perform advanced hunting from the 365 Defender. With advanced hunting, the data can be set into categories, into two different types, each consolidated different, for example. It can be put it into the category of event or activity data, which will populate a table about the alerts, security events, system events also, and routine assessments on. We can go for advanced hunting, which will receive this data almost immediately after the sensors that collect them will successfully transmit them to the corresponding cloud services. And it can be categorized as an entity data, which will populate table with information about users and devices. And this data comes from both relatively static data sources and dynamic sources, such as Active Directory entries and event logs. Advanced hunting is based into the custom query language or the KQL, and we can use custom operators and statements to create queries that will locate information in a specialized schema. So when a short comment has been added to the beginning of a query to describe what it is for, this comment helps if we later decide to save the query and share it with others in the organization. The query itself will typically start with a table name, followed by several elements that usually are filters that will start with a pipe. In this example, we start by creating a union of two tables, the device process event table and the device network event table in this case, and add pipe elements as needed. So the first pipe element is the time filter scope to a previous 7 days, and then limiting the time range to help ensure that the queries perform well and that there is a return manageable results and will not time out. Now, when we are using, well, depending on the tool that we are using, we can go hunting from the log analytic workspace or the Sentinel and from the Microsoft 365 Defender threat hunting on. What's the difference? That when we already subscribed to the Microsoft 365 from the beginning, we don't need to create nothing, not resources and so on. The service is built in, so as many times as I wanted to use it, I can find it there. Well, when we're creating an Azure AD log analytics, I need to manually specify the log workspace that I will need to use and specify a name. Name doesn't need to be already taken by somebody else. Name needs to be unique for my log workspace. So the name of the table when I need to access ones that I just created, it is the signing logs, while the defender for threat hunting is the AAD signing events Vita. Okay, from 365 Defender, also we can take a look at a secure score. This secure score is divided into multiple categories. At the end, from all those categories, the average percentage will be presented for the teams, basically. Like, for example, imagine that we are taking a look and that we are looking at it the first time. Security score was 43.3%, for example. But well, the bad news here is that there's another 57% that are reporting to basically have other individual recommendations that can give me the required points that I need to getting close to my 100% or to the 90 or 80 something, for example, but not still working with a 43.3%, for example. So that means that your security score is associated to the health of the services or the best practices comparing to a baseline, for example, but with the only purpose to try to make it better, basically, eventually. Tracking emerging threats with threat intelligence or with threat analytics, Orion. The threat analytic dashboard help us to highlight the reports that are most relevant to our organization, and it summarizes the threats in different sections. In the latest threats, the high impact threats, the high exposure ones. So selecting a threat from the dashboard and its views, the report for the threat. So you can view a threat analytic report, and each threat analytic report will provide information in several sections: in an overview, in an analysis report, in a related incidents, impacted assets, prevented email attempts, exposure and mitigation, and so on. The reports blade for the 365 Defender provides access to all the available reports for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and Microsoft Defender for Office 365. So in general, we can view information about security trends and track the protection status of our identities, data, devices, apps, and infrastructure. That's for the general part. The endpoint part will include some other sections, let's say like the threat protection, where we can see details about the security detection and alerts in the organization, a device health and compliance, that we can use this section to monitor the health state, the antivirus status, operating system platform, Windows version for devices in organization, and so on. We can also find out a vulnerable device by viewing information about the vulnerable device in our organization, including their exposure to vulnerabilities on it. A recommendation for a firewall and to view connection blocked by our firewall, including related devices. So why they are blocked and which ports were used on. Section 4, device control. This will report the organization media usage and the attack surface reduction rules, which we can use to view information about detections, misconfiguration, and suggested exclusions in our environment. We can also configure Microsoft 365 Defender for notify, for notifications on. We can manage incident email notifications. So to view, add, or edit incident email notification setting for our organization, we can follow a series of steps. In the navigation pane, we can select the settings and then select the Microsoft 365 Defender. And then we need to select on email notifications. Next, we need to select incidents to add a new notification and select add incident email notification. We need to enter a name and a description, and then we need to click on next. And we can select the device and alert criteria, then next, and then enter the recipient's email address, the next, and then select the create rule. For manage threat analytics with email notifications, to view or edit the threat analytics email notification setting for organization, we can follow a series of steps also in the navigation, selecting settings, and then select 365 Defender option. Then we need to select email notification. And next, we need to select the threat analytics to add a new notification. Then select the create a notification rule, enter a name and description. Then next, then select threat analytics criteria. Then next, then enter recipient's email address. And then finally select the create rule button. Okay, there is one lab exercise associated with the module 1, which is for mitigating threats using Microsoft 365 Defender. And the objective for this lab is for you to explore the Microsoft 365 Defender. Okay. However, I will move on to the module number 2, and then before finishing with this session in the next 45 minutes, I will use the remaining time for explaining you how you can spin up your lab environment and what do you need to do, because you actually need to activate your Azure pass in order to create some infrastructure and working with that infrastructure basically. So we're leaving this lab exercise and the explanation at the end because we still have the module 2 to cover, guys. Give me a second here to set the module 2 to presentation mode. Now, the first module focuses on the Microsoft 365 Defender, the portal and what we can do with that, and the incident response, alerts, hunting, and so on. Module 2 is associated with a specific subproduct from the Defender 365 in general, and that is what the second is for the Defender mitigating threats using Defender for Endpoint. All right. Module 2 is mitigate threats using Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. The first lesson starts with the protect against threats with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Some of the topics into this, or lessons into this, or topics into this lesson, sorry, to define the capabilities of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, describe how to hunt threats within our network, and explain how Microsoft Defender for Endpoint can remediate some risk in our environment, for example. Now, we're looking at a process of how can I say that? We can take a look at the Defender for Endpoint as a process that we need to follow for the onboard devices, and that process will not happen automatically, basically. So Defender for Endpoint is a platform designed to help the enterprise network to prevent, detect, investigate, and respond to advanced threats in their endpoints. Yeah, that would be like the main goal. So there's a list of steps that describe this illustration following the order with the numbers on. First, the devices need to be onboarded through one of the supported management tools. Then, after being onboarded, the devices provide and respond to Microsoft Defender for endpoint signal data. The step number 3, manage devices that are joined and or enrolled in Azure Active Directory. There is a step number 4 also. The main join Windows devices are synced to Azure AD using Azure Active Directory Connect. And 6, to use share signals with the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. On a step 4, we have an option to add third-party endpoints like the ones on the on-premise through an Azure AD Connect. With Azure AD Connect, we can synchronize the two environments and create a sync environment with an ADDS to Azure AD, basically. So we can join devices that we have not enrolled into an on-premise and the ones that we have into the on-premise also with the onboarding process. This onboarding process, what it does is to just, with a script or with an agent deployment, is install the agent and communicate the agent with the cloud service that is the Defender for Endpoint, basically. So eventually, by following some of the steps, will work. If we wanted to see it as a demonstration, I can return to my portal here and we will locate the security portal and go into settings, into the left vertical menu, and into the main settings, we will locate the endpoint section. We can click on it and we can scroll down until we see the device management option, and there is a process for onboarding and offboarding. Of course, that we're interested into the onboarding into a new tenant because no endpoints will be onboarded previously automatically. So here we need to select the base operating system. And another difference comparing to an ADDS environment to a private cloud with ADDS environment is that we are not limited to a Windows operating system, not just Windows Server or Windows Client, because we can see that there is support for Android, iOS, Linux servers, or Mac OS, for example. So we're selecting the corresponding one, and we select a deployment method depending on this operating system that we just select. Would you like a local script, a group policy, a Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager current branch later? That I think that this will not be an option. Mobile through mobile device management or Microsoft Intune, and from virtual desktop infrastructure onboarding scripts for no persistent devices. So in my case, if I don't have something special, no group policy, no on-premise, the local script will be an option on it. With the local script, I can click to download the onboarding page or the onboarding package, running a detection test to confirm that everything goes down. And well, that's all. So we can follow that onboarding process from the same Defender portal and especially from the Defender for Endpoint subproduct. Security operations and how they happen in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. This detection and response capability will provide an advanced attack detections that are near real-time and actionable. So when a threat is detected into our endpoints, an alert will be created in the system for an analyst to investigate. And alerts with the same attack techniques or attributed to the same attacker are aggregated into an entity called an incident. So by aggregating alerts in this manner, it will make it easy for analysts to investigate and respond to threats collectively on. The next lesson for Module 2 is to deploy the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint environment. Now, when we are talking about deploy the environment is the first time that we are using our tenant with the Microsoft 365 Defender, and especially for Defender for Endpoint. There is a main process for, let's say, make the Defender for Endpoint ready. Now, within this tenant, I have been signing in for quite some time already. And that's why I can see into the main settings, the endpoint section, because originally the first time the endpoint section is not appearing, or you can see it from there. But when you click on it, instead of looking at this submenu, you can see like a mug of coffee with a hang on while we are doing something that when we are creating the environment actually for Defender for Endpoint. So in that case, we can see with the mug of coffee that we need to wait a couple of minutes for that process to finish in order to see the menu and to take a look at the permissions menu, the data retention to set, the APIs, the rules, configuration management, device management, network assessment, and so on. Okay, so the this lesson is focusing on that deploy the Defender for Endpoint environment. That is basically going and trying to access to the endpoint section. And if it is your first time, you will see that you will need to wait for that enablement process, for example, usually looking at that mug of coffee as a confirmation that that process is on its way to become active, an active one. So the topics into this lesson are we are going to see how we can create a Defender for Endpoint environment, onboarding devices to be monitored by Defender for Endpoint, and how we can configure Defender for Endpoint environment setting. To understand some compatibility or compatible operating system, I already showed you from the onboarding list from the drop down that there is support for Windows, Windows 7, Windows 10, Windows 11, Mac OS, Linux, Android, Linux, well, iOS, sorry. To create our environment, we need to go for security.microsoft.com and then taking a look at the permissions, taking a look at the endpoints, and then clicking on the endpoint. Then once that we just go for the security.microsoft.com and that we go for the settings and clicking on the endpoint section, then we're going to open the submenu for the endpoints on it. And this is where we can start being curious and clicking until the data storage location for how long. We're going to determine where we want to be hosted. We cannot change the location after this setup. So this step is important. Then we can configure the data retention that the default is set to 6 months, but we can just reconfigure that for a little bit less or more time of retention on it. So we can enable some preview features. The default option is set to on, but it can be changed later, for example. Now, this is something I already showed you with a demonstration of the process for onboarding the devices. Defender for Endpoint uses a sensor or an agent that requires a particular protocol, the Microsoft Windows HTTP or the WinHTTP to report sensor data and to communicate with the Defender for Endpoint service. So under the Defender for Endpoint context, an endpoint is equal to a device, and the process of onboarding means that the devices or computers will be configured under the scope of Defender for Endpoint. So for those onboarding options, there is a list of the Windows supported deployment options on it. Deployment through group policy, through Microsoft Endpoint configuration, for mobile device management, local script option, or VDI, onboarding script for non-persistent devices on. And actually, there's a process to offboarding devices when we no longer need to carry on with devices that are not up to date. Then we can follow a process for offboarding. Then to implement a role-based access, we will need to define some administrative roles. And we can assign corresponding permissions and assign actually the user groups assigned to the role. And before using RBAC, we should understand the roles that can grant permissions and the consequences of turning on the RBAC. So when we just first sign in to Microsoft 365 Defender portal, and then we are going to be granted either to full access right if we are a global administrator or security administrator by accessing to the 365 Defender portal. However, we need to follow a series of steps. we need to access to the M365 Defender portal using an account with security admin or global admin privilege. And into the 365 Defender, we select permissions and roles. In the permissions and roles, we can screen under endpoint roles and groups. And then we can select on roles. We can select on add the items. We can enter a role name, a description, and permission. And we would like to assign to the role on the Assign User Group tab. We can assign the role to an Azure AD security group. We just use the filter to select the Azure AD. To the Azure AD security group, and we can use the filter to select the Azure AD group that we would like to add to the role to. We can click on Save and Close and apply the configuration settings at the end. We can also configure device groups. In Defender for Endpoint, we can create device groups, and we can use them to, for example, in an investigation, to filter the devices list to just specific device groups by using the group filter. We can also use groups to assign specific remediation levels to apply during automated investigations. Or we can use it for configure different auto remediation settings for different set of devices, or to limit access to related alerts and data to specific Azure AD user groups with assigned role-based access control role. We can also create device groups in the context of the role-based access control to control who can take specific actions or who can see information by assigning the device group to a user group. And as part of the process of creating a device group, we will set the automated remediation level for the group, specify a matching rule that determines which device group belongs to the group based on the device name, select the Azure AD user group that should have access to the device group, and rank the device group relative to the other groups after it is created. To create a device group in the Defender portal, we can select the settings and select endpoints, then on the permission, select device group. And then we can click on select add a device group, enter the device group name, some automation settings, and specify the matching rule, preview several devices that will match the rule, assign the user groups that can access the device group that we create, and we can click on select done. The configuration changes are applied. Then there is a lesson that we can use to perform some device investigation. And as part of these topics, then we are going to use the device page in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, describe the device forensics information collected by Defender for Endpoint, and describe behavioral blocking by Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. We can take a look at the device inventory lists. Once that we complete the first onboarding of one or a couple of objects, we will expect to see on this view in the there is a section for devices, devices inventory, where all of the previously onboarded and successfully onboarded that already installed the agent, configure, and communicate with the service, eventually we'll start reporting some information, like in this case, where we can find out a device name, a domain, a risk level, if it is a risk, an exposure level, the operating system platform detected by the agent, the Windows 10 version, health state, and last seen, for example. So we, as responsible for this type of security operations on it, it is our responsibility for paying attention also to a risk level, exposure level, for example, on it. And for checking in that the right objects are the ones displayed and that are actually actual devices from the users that are real ones, for example. We can select some affected devices whenever we see them in the portal to open a detailed report about that device. And we can investigate a specific device. We will see some device details that will provide information such as the device domain and operating system, its health state, and so on. We can also see a submenu for responding with actions or response actions on, where this response action submenu will include a manage tag or tagging to resource to these devices. We have an option to isolate a device as responding to a threat or to a critical incident, for example. We can restrict an application execution also for protection. We can run antivirus scan. We can collect investigation package. We can initiate a live response session, initiate automated investigation, consult a threat expert, action center that we can take response actions in the action center or on a specific device or on a specific file page. There are different tabs also, like an overview, alerts, timeline, security recommendations, software inventory, discover vulnerabilities, missing KVs. There's an overview tab that will display the card for active alerts, log on users, security assessment, active alerts. And the Azure Defender card will display a high-level overview of active alerts related to the device and their risk level if we have enabled the Azure ATP feature. When there is suspicious behavior and detected, Defender Antivirus will help us to monitor and send those suspicious behaviors and their process trees to the Cloud Protection Service. And their machine learning will differentiate between malicious applications and good behaviors within milliseconds and will classify each artifact. So as soon as an artifact is found to be malicious, it is going to be blocked on the device, and whenever suspicious behavior is detected, an alert is generated and is visible into the Microsoft Defender Security Center client behavioral blocking. And it will be effective because it is not only help prevent an attack from starting, but it can help stop an attack that has begun executing. So with feedback loop blocking, another capability of is behavioral blocking and containment, the attacks are going to be prevented on other devices in your organization. Behavior-based detections are named according to a MITRE attack matrix for enterprise. What's the MITRE attack matrix for enterprise on? MITRE is a series of known attacks from the multiple tactics, and there is an organization actually. If we search for MITRE attack framework, we will get the attack.mitre.org. And then there is a repository or attack matrix for enterprise with known stage of attacks that go from left to right, from recognizance to resource development to initial access, execution, persistent, privilege escalation, and so on. And every attack has multiple techniques or disciplines, for example. And then this, we can see it translated to this behavior-based detection from the Defender for Endpoint. According to this MITRE attack matrix for the enterprise, the naming convention will help us to identify the attack stage where the malicious behavior was observed. Okay, so we have a demonstration here to detect devices with device discovery. Okay, what we're going to do, because well, time allows us to do something like that. It's just a couple of minutes. I will use the Azure portal to create as quick as possible a virtual machine. I have an active subscription there, but there is no resources yet. So let's create a new one. I will create a Windows-based virtual machine in the Azure portal. Then I will use that virtual machine to download the endpoint with a local script, and I will run it. And eventually I will see the device added to the inventory, and then we can take a look at the submenu after that. Well, maybe the time is not going to allow to see that, but maybe tomorrow we can see it. So let's create a new resource group that I will call a VMS for virtual machines. If I need to create more in the future, I will use it again. Let's call this VM1. Let's select a Windows 2019 data center. Let me select a different region because that one apparently doesn't have the standard D2S v3. Let's specify a username, an extra character from there apparently. Let me just confirm. No, it's not the same. So give me a second to type it again. Okay, it works. Clicking on next, next, next. The full VNet will be created. That's okay. No worries. I would like to auto shut down this. I'm finishing every day at 11 a.m. in my local time. So I don't want that. Send me a notification. Okay. We are on the process for creating this virtual machine, and it's going to take a couple of minutes for it. While we're waiting for that, we can move on to the next lesson. Which, I think that this would be the final one for this module, and the other topics you are going to take it as your homework. Lesson 7 is for configure and manage automation. 2 topics on this: configure advanced features of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and manage automation settings in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint also. Some advanced features in the general settings provides many on or off switches for features within the product. And some of those automation focus settings will be that in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal, we can select settings, select the endpoints, and then select the advanced features in the general area to configure advanced features on. Those advanced features, for example, are for enabling the automated investigation, the automation capabilities for investigation and response. We have an option to enable endpoint detection and response, or EDR, in block mode. When this option is turned on, Defender for Endpoint uses behavioral blocking and containment capabilities by blocking malicious artifacts or behaviors observed through the post-breach endpoint detection and response. And this feature doesn't change how Microsoft Defender for Endpoint performs detection, some other generation, and incident correlation. There is also an option for automatically resolve alerts. This can help us to resolve an alert if automated investigation finds no threats or has successfully remediated all malicious artifacts. Or we can configure to turn on an option called the allow or block the file to make sure that the Windows Defender antivirus is turned on and the cloud-based protection feature is enabled in our organization to use the allow or the block file feature. Managing automation, upload and folder settings, we can go for settings endpoints, then inside endpoints rules, and then into rules, a submenu with automation uploads and automation folder exclusions. In this option, the file content analysis capability, certain files and email attachment can automatically be uploaded to the cloud for additional inspection in automated investigation. There, we can identify the files and email attachments by specifying the file extension names and email attachment extension names. Defender for Endpoint can automatically investigate memory content of processes. So when enabled, the memory content might be uploaded to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint during an automated investigation. Also, we can configure an automation folder exclusion that allows us to specify folders that the automated investigation will skip, and we can control attributes about the folder that we would like to be skipped, like folders, extensions of files, file names, and so on. Then to configure the automated investigation and remediation, we can turn on the features, and then we can set up the device groups We can turn on automated investigation or remediation, setting up these device groups, and into this Defender portal under permissions and roles, we can select device groups. Then we can select on the plus to add a device group. We need to create at least one device group, and in the automation level list, we can select a level. From the levels, we can select from all these 5 different options. The automation levels to full or number 1, remediate threats automatically, and also is referred to a full automation or try, let's say. The number 2 is semi, but which requires approval for any remediation, or referred as a semi-automation. With this level of semi-automation, the approval is required for any remediation action. The number 3 is semi also, but requires approval for non-temp folder remediation. Also, a type of semi-automation, but with this level of semi-automation, approval is required for any remediation actions needed on files or executables that are not in temporary folders. And there is the final option, that is the no automated response or no automation. With no automation, the automated investigation does not return on organization devices, and as a result, no remediation actions are taken or pending as a result of an automated investigation. For blocking at-risk devices, these are there are steps that we'll need to take in Defender or into the Intune portal or in the Azure AD portal that require roles to access these portals and implement conditional access. Like, for example, going to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, we will need to sign into the portal with a global admin role to turn on that integration. Or to the Intune portal, we will need to sign in to this portal with security administrator rights with management permissions on it. Or to the Azure AD portal, we will need to sign in as a global administrator, security administrator, or conditional access administrator. We can take the following steps to enable conditional access. We can turn on the Microsoft Intune connection from Microsoft 365 Defender portal, turn on Defender for Endpoint integration in Intune, create a compliance policy in Intune, assign the policy, and finally create an Azure AD conditional access policy. We can configure for alerts and detections also. We can configure alert settings in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and manage indicators in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint also. Into the advanced features page in the general area of settings, endpoints are of the Microsoft Defender portal provides the following alert and detection related settings. A live response. By turning this feature to on, users with the appropriate permissions can start a live response session on devices, like a connecting to the device with a live response that they can see, or we can send requests to the device and it's going to send a response back, basically. They can establish a live response with an unsigned script execution. By enabling this feature, allows you to run unsigned scripts in the live response session, or with a custom network indicators. Turning on this feature allows to create indicators for IP addresses, domains, or URLs, which will determine whether they will be allowed or blocked based on our custom indicator list. Some other advanced features is to configure Defender for Identity integration, which retrieves user and device data from Microsoft Defender for Identity and can forward Microsoft Defender for Endpoint signals. Office 365 Threat Intelligence Connection is another option. Connect this Office 365 Threat Intelligence to enable security investing or investigation across Office 365 mailboxes and Windows devices. There is also integration for Defender for Cloud Apps, which this option will forward Defender for Endpoint signals to Defender for Cloud Apps, giving the administrators a better visibility into both sanctioned cloud applications and the shadow IT on it. We can also integrate into connections on it to enable sharing of device information and enhance the policy enforcement, and the Microsoft Security Score, which will forward the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint signals, giving the Microsoft Secure Score visibility into the device security posture also. And we can configure email notifications on by going to Defender, into the Defender menu, the endpoints, into the endpoint section, the general, and then into general, the email notifications. And this feature enables us to identify a group of individuals who will immediately be informed and can act on alerts based on their severity. And we can see um, how it is going to be configured at the right with a new notification rule with the general features, recipients, and so on. And we can see at the left how the content into this email will look like with an ID, an incident name, a severity, categories, time, and an incident page, for example. There might be scenarios where we need to suppress alerts for appearing in Microsoft 365 Defender. So suppression rules can be created from an existing alert, and they can be disabled and re-enabled if needed. So when a suppression rule is created, it will take effect from the point when the rule is created, and the rule will not affect existing alerts already in the queue prior to the rule creation. The rule will only be applied on alerts that satisfy the conditions set after the rule is created. And there are two contexts for a suppression rule that we can choose from: suppress alerts on this device or suppress alerts in my organization. The context of the rule led just to tailor what gets surfaced into the portal and ensure that only real security alerts are surfaced into the portal. Indicators, or IOCs, indicators of compromise, are individually known malicious events that will indicate that a network or device has already been breached. So unlike alert definition, these indicators are considered as evidence of a breach, and they are often seen after an attack has already been carried out and the objective has been reached, such as an exfiltration. So keeping track of indicators of compromise is also important during forensic investigation. There is 4 types of indicators of compromise: the files, the IP addresses, the URLs and domains, and also the certificates. The cloud detection engine of Defender for Endpoint regularly scans the collected data and tries to match the indicators that we set. When there is a match, action will be taken according to the settings that we specify for the indicators of compromise. The current supported actions into an IOC is the allow, alert only, or alert and block. Okay, Module 2 has another lab exercise which you will have the time to get your hands on into the 2.5-hour session, the next session that we're going to take after the 30-minute break, into the lab and Q&A session. Okay, so to get your hands on into these 2 lab exercises: deploy Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and mitigate attacks using Defender for Endpoint. Okay, let me try to finish for the remaining time. We have another 7 minutes for this session. The virtual machine, well, just forgot to just click on create for passing the validation. It's going to take another couple of minutes. Let me then explain to you how you can access your labs. Give me a second here to open a file that it will serve as a guide. This is how your student view works. You can see the Microsoft Wix, Cloud Wix with learning experience. And then once that you are logging into the virtual conference, you can click on the tracks. And then you can click on the attend tracks. You can select the track that you have registered for. In our case, it will be the security one. And into the security, you are going to check on the SC200, for example. Then you will find your security tracks, for example. Then you can, once your time zone has been selected from the list, all sessions and labs associated with your chosen track will be available to you. You can filter to hands-on lab and select apply, and you can click on launch to enter the lab portal. Then you can see your name of your lab, a track name, an ICS training bag, and then an option to click on the launch. Make sure that your curriculum says hands-on lab, and then you can click on apply to start filtering. Once that is filtered, then you can click on launch. And once that you enter the Microsoft Cloud Weeks Lab portal, you can, using one of the supported browsers like Edge, Chrome, Firefox, or another HTML5 compliant browser, you will be redirected from the On24 platform to the following page with cloudweeks.learnondemand.net/class enrollment/ and a few X's that will be replaced with a class ID, a unique enrollment ID. To be able to access the labs, you must agree to the end user license agreement on the class enrollment page, and then to first view the agreement, select the view agreement. When the license agreement is displayed, you can select on agree. And then labs are not available to be launched until a class has officially begun. And you have a post-class lab access that usually you will have like a week or a couple of weeks, even after this week session, basically. So when you, this SC200 will include only one main lab that you are going to click on launch. Now, something important to notice or to pay attention here. Sometimes you are working with a device that is owned by your organization and it is into a controlled network environment using a VPN, for example, or using pop-up blockers or something like that. If you are using a control device that you are not able to make any change or that you are not able to disconnect from the VPN, sometimes by connecting to the VPN, you are subject to the policies of the network. Like if you are into your into the network location of your office, including the possibility to not opening RDP protocols. And actually, when we are accessing to the lab, it is like a making a remote connection to the lab environment because there will be virtual machines there. Okay, so if you can, and if you're experiencing a problem that when you're clicking to launch the lab, nothing happens, or you can see that there is a black screen on it and never shows up the view of your virtual machine, that means that maybe you are connected to the VPN. If you can, try to disconnect from the VPN, please. If that is not an option, then your only option would be to perform all these steps to launch your lab, but using a different device that is not under the control environment. Or if you are connected to a network, not through a VPN, but physically to a network with Wi-Fi or with a wire connection that is into a control environment with the policies and the rules from a firewall that doesn't allow you, and you don't have an option to create an exception for that, try to connect to a different network, to a public network or something that is under privilege or with a separate device, or from your home, for example, to work with your labs with an environment like that. A pop-up blocker may be blocking your launch because a new pop-up will be created when you're clicking on launch. So make sure that you are at least configuring an exception for that. Okay, so you can see it from there on. So your lab user interface will look like this. If you don't see something like this and you can just see a black or empty space on it, maybe it's because it's being blocked. Now, we have only 2 minutes. The session is going to end automatically. However, this is not all yet. We are going to take the 30-minute break, and you can join to the Q&A session with a new link, a separate link with the bottom of the Q&A session on. Into the Q&A session, I can present again. In that session, I will start that session after the break with a guided demonstration on how to launch your lab and what is the expectation from here, because you actually need to activate an Azure Pass. I will show you how to do that and guide you through a couple of steps into the first exercise on it. Once that I just guide you to the first steps to activate your Azure Pass and to start working with a couple of tasks, for example, from your lab, then you can move on at your own pace. And we will be available there from the Q&A session, for example. So if you have questions or something like that, we are going to be there from the next 2 hours and 30 minutes, willing to answer to all of your questions, okay? All right, guys. We only have 1 minute. Thank you so much for your attention, your time, participation also. I will present the lessons that you need, that you're going to take as homework according to the plan. but when we just join to the Q&A session, okay? I will just take the screenshot for that, and I will start presenting also along with the with another slide for lap time, basically after the explanation. So I'm going to be ready with this one. So guys, thank you so much for your time, attention, participation, and see you in 30 minutes to start it. Start with the lab and Q&A.